Something weird happened to me a few years ago, and I'm going to do my best to get the details right. I had been using Hinge on and off for about a year, and at the time I hadn't met anybody special. One night though, I matched with Julie, a girl who seemed too good to be true. We hit it off right away, and it seemed that she was into me as well. I have a pretty good eye for fake profiles, and this one looked real, even though she was gorgeous. But still, I couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that I was being catfished, so I decided to look her up on social media. She hadn't linked anything in her profile, but she did tell me where she worked, and one of her pictures was of her college graduation. That let me know where she went to school and in which year. With that information, it wasn't hard to find her profile on Facebook. It all seemed to check out. The photos matched, and the Facebook profile was created back in 2009. This happened in 2022, so I knew the Facebook account was real. I wanted to add her as a friend or send a message just to make sure, but I didn't want her to know that I looked her up. I thought it would come off as creepy. We kept on messaging for a while, then eventually I asked her out. She said yes, and then suggested that we meet at a tea house downtown, a spot that I wasn't familiar with. However, it wasn't far from my building, just a 10-minute bus ride. I arrived about 5 minutes early and stood out front. I noticed right away that the place was closed. It was 7:30, and the tea house was only open until 5 on weekends. I thought I would just wait there until she arrived, and then we would find something else, but then my phone buzzed. When I checked my messages, there was one from Julie. She told me that the tea house was closed and asked me to meet her at the parking lot of the grocery store next door. It was closed for the night as well, but I guess she was going to park there and then we would find a bar. I wasn't planning on getting into a stranger's car. Not even I am that stupid. The parking lot was literally right around the corner, so I walked over and peeked in. It was nearly empty, except for a single car parked way at the end. The parking lot was dark, but the car had its headlights on. Something felt off, but I cautiously approached the car anyway. As I inched closer, through the windshield, I could make out the figure of a man in the front seat. With that, I knew something was up. I snapped a picture with my phone and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't know if I could do anything with the picture, but it was worth a try. It was not very clear, and the license plate was not readable. At the time, I was thinking I would just have to chalk this one up to experience, because no harm was really done. I walked home feeling a little disappointed, but no big deal. When I checked Hinge later though, Julie had blocked me. Not surprising at all, because I knew she was just some guy. That was when I remembered the Facebook profile. I logged on and saw it was still there. I still thought it was real, and if somebody was using her identity to catfish people, then it would only be fair to let her know. I sent the real Julie a message explaining what happened to me. Her response came the next day. She told me that she didn't even have a profile on Hinge, so somebody was definitely stealing her identity. She asked if I saw the person and wanted to know every detail. I told her that I saw him, but didn't get a good look, and then I attached the picture that I took of the car, not thinking that it would be much help. The next reply from her was truly shocking. Julie recognized the car and the man in the driver's seat, even though it was unclear. She told me that it was her stepfather. He had stolen her identity to trick guys on dating apps. Pretty creepy stuff. Julie and I continued to message back and forth, trying to piece together what happened. She was understandably upset and embarrassed about what her stepfather had done. We speculated on various scenarios, but she was always insistent that he wouldn't have hurt me. I didn't blame her for taking that stance, but I don't necessarily agree. Anyone who's capable of doing something so creepy is capable of all kinds of things, and if he wasn't going to hurt me, then what would he have done if I got into that car? Just laugh and say gotcha? Not likely. That guy was going to do something horrible that night, and I got away. I think he needs to be watched closely, but he didn't really do anything illegal to me, so the police couldn't do much. Maybe it was illegal to steal his stepdaughter's identity, but I don't think she wanted to press charges. My only hope is that somebody's keeping an eye on that guy, because he's seriously disturbed. This happened back in 2010, when I had first started using some of the dating apps. It was before I even had a smartphone, so it was pretty much just eHarmony and Plenty of Fish that I was on. I know that there are a lot more of them now, but I never got into those ones. And luckily, I'm off the market now, so I never had to experience what singles are going through these days. That being said, I did have one creepy experience with online dating, and I would like to share that one now. I was scrolling through some profiles on Plenty of Fish, and I sent a few messages out. For those who don't know, you didn't have to swipe back then. It was just a big list of pictures, and you could message anyone. Therefore, you wouldn't get responses most of the time, because they might not have even been interested at all. I was getting a little frustrated, and almost gave up, but then I got a reply from a girl named Carrie. We hit it off alright, and she did a good job of keeping the conversation interesting. It was refreshing compared to most others, where getting a reply was hard, and getting more than a one-word answer was rare. Carrie seemed interested, and I was excited about that. After a few days of constant messaging, we decided to meet up for drinks. It felt right, or at least as right as anything could feel when you're about to meet a stranger from the internet. This would have only been my third online date, so I was still new to it. The others didn't lead anywhere, but they were not terrible experiences. Carrie sent me her number, and then I sent her a text so that she would have mine. When the day of our date came, I sent her a text to confirm. She replied asking for a change of plans. She explained that her cat had suddenly gotten sick, and she needed to stay home to take care of him, but she still wanted to meet, and suggested that I come over to her place. A red flag? Maybe, but at the time it seemed like a genuine, albeit unfortunate turn of events. She sent over the address, and after hesitating for a minute, I accepted. I arrived at the building, which was a large apartment building, and there was a major bus station nearby. Standing in front of the entrance, I sent her a quick message to let her know I was there. Seconds later, she approached me from behind, catching me off guard. When I turned around, I saw that her face matched the photos that I had seen on her profile. That was somewhat of a relief, because at least I knew that I wasn't being catfished. I was a little nervous though, but not as much as before. She opened the door, and we made our way up to her apartment. The halls of the building were drab and outdated. The elevator was small and felt shaky. It was definitely a lower-end building, not unlike the one where I was living at the time though. When we got to the apartment on the 6th floor, Carrie opened the door and led me inside. She excused herself to use the bathroom shortly after we arrived, leaving me alone in the living room. That's when I noticed it. There were voices coming from one of the bedrooms. She didn't mention having a roommate, but I guess it wasn't impossible. That'd be an awkward thing if her roommate was around though. And if there was somebody else home, then couldn't they take care of the cat? I was freaked out while I sat there, but then I noticed something else. I hadn't seen any pet-related items when I was there, and no sign of the cat. Even more troubling, there was not a strand of pet hair on any of the furniture. I'd had animals before, and I know how impossible it is to get rid of cat hair. There would have been some. Something didn't feel right, and the more I listened, the more convinced I became that I didn't want to be there. Quietly, I stood up and made my way to the door, and then I slipped out of the apartment. No sooner had the door clicked shut behind me than I heard the sound of movement from one of the bedrooms, and I heard heavy footsteps, unmistakably those of a large man, not a small girl like Carrie. As I was waiting for the elevator in the hallway, I heard the door to the apartment open. A man stuck his head out the door and looked over to me. Then the door closed, and I heard the lock slide into place. I didn't know what was going on in that apartment, but it was really suspicious. Once I was safely outside, I pulled out my phone to check if I had any messages from Carrie. Honestly, I wasn't even going to bother saying anything. I would have been happy enough to forget about her, and not even bother asking what was going on. There was nothing though, so I just went home. When I got home, I checked Plenty of Fish, and Carrie's profile was gone. I'm not sure if she deleted it, or if she just blocked me. Every message that we exchanged was gone, erasing any evidence that our interaction ever even occurred. Maybe she was mad that I ditched her, or maybe she wanted to destroy the evidence that I was ever there. In retrospect, the signs were there, subtle but unmistakable indicators that something was wrong. The last-minute change of plans, the man in the apartment, and the missing cat were all enough to raise major red flags. I never got any real closure about what happened, but I did make it out safely, and I'm thankful for that. Whenever I tell this story, I'm glad that I'm not dating anymore. Based on what I've heard, things have gotten pretty crazy out there. For all of you that are still trying to find someone, please be careful. Take the lesson from me, and don't learn it the hard way. I downloaded the Tinder app a few years after it started to become popular. At the time, I was 22, and I had a room in a shared house with some guys who I didn't really know. It was a lonely time in my life, because I didn't know anybody in my city. My roommates were alright, but they all had their own lives, so I was the odd one out most of the time. I knew that Tinder was supposed to be a hookup app, but I really was looking for more of a connection, silly as that sounds. Because of that, I wasn't just swiping on the hottest girls, I was swiping on pretty much everyone. I guess I had some beginner's luck in my first few days, because I got over 10 matches. I was scrolling through them, trying to decide which one to message, when a message came in. That was a surprise, because I thought that most girls didn't like to make the first move. I was excited though, and replied right away. After an hour of chatting, I asked to meet, and she agreed. Her name was Claire, and she was 20 years old, a student, with curly blonde hair. Her pictures were really good, almost professional looking. When I told Claire where I lived, she suggested that we meet at a park that was not too far away. She never told me where she lived, but I figured it couldn't be far if she wanted to meet there. On the night of our date, I microwaved some food and ate in my room, then I left without telling any of my roommates. It was late fall, and it was getting cold, but not too bad. I had a sweatshirt on, and a thick jacket that was undone. It was during this walk that I noticed a white van pass by me. At first I didn't think much of it, but then the same van passed me again, slower this time. I looked over at it, but at that angle, I wasn't able to see the driver. Eventually the van disappeared from my sight, and 5 minutes later, I turned down the street that the park was on. When I got close to the entrance, I saw that the van was parked on the street. I remember thinking, great, now I'm being stalked by some creep in a van. Still, I was there to meet Claire, not to chicken out because of some random guy. I cut through the park and made my way to the bench where we agreed to meet. Then I checked my phone to see if there were any messages from Claire. There weren't any, so I sat there and waited. It was still early, so I didn't want to message her and sound desperate. At exactly the time when we were supposed to meet, my phone buzzed with a message. It was Claire asking me to meet her on the other side of the park. It was no problem, but I didn't know why she couldn't just meet where we agreed before. It wasn't worth arguing over, so I went with it. That meant walking past the van, though. As I approached the van, I could see that the side door was slightly ajar, which struck me as odd. Just as I was about to pass by, the door swung open fully, and an older man stepped out. I was face to face with him for a split second, before he tried to grab me. I pulled away, but he caught the sleeve of my jacket with his hand. I tried to squirm free, but there was no way he was letting go. All the while, he was grabbing at my other arm with his free hand. It was not looking good for me, because this man was way bigger than me, and with that creepy van right next to us, I knew that if he got me, then I would be screwed. As a last resort, I got out of my jacket, rolling on the ground to wriggle free. Once I was out, I backed away a fair distance from the man. He was just standing there next to the van looking at me. He was still holding my jacket, but surprisingly, he never chased me. He was strong, but fortunately for me, he was not a runner. I didn't stick around any longer to find out what he wanted, and I ran away. I didn't stop until I was away from the park, and back to the relative safety of a busier road. I glanced back once to see if I was being followed, but I wasn't. I could still see the white van in the distance. It looked like it still hadn't moved. I was almost back home, and I was on a busier road with some bars and fast food places. That's when I saw the van again. It cruised by slowly, and slowed even further as it passed me. I looked over, and the driver's side window was down. I could see that the driver was the man who attacked me earlier. Our eyes met for a moment, and the chill that went down my spine was unlike anything I'd ever felt. The man behind the wheel had a look that was both ugly and scary. His eyes were cold, the kind that seemed like they could look right through you, and I knew without a doubt that his intentions were far from good. I tried to see the license plate from the van, but it was covered up by something. I stood there frozen on the sidewalk, watching as it disappeared into the night. I realized how close I had come to a potentially disastrous situation. My initial excitement about meeting Claire had turned into a nightmare scenario that I was lucky to escape from. And I pulled out my phone and called the police. I reported the van and the man, describing the events in as much detail as I could remember. But even as I ended the call, a part of me doubted they would find him. Before I went anywhere near my house, I scanned the street for the van. The last thing I wanted was to lead him to my home. When I was sure it was safe, I went inside and headed straight for my room. It was only then that I even bothered to open Tinder and block Claire, or whoever she was. By then I was pretty sure she was fake. And when I opened our conversation, I had a new message from her. It read, "Nice jacket." That weirdo was taunting me. I took a screenshot for the police, but didn't give them the satisfaction of a response. After this, I didn't use Tinder again for a long time. Years later, I had some alright experiences with it, so take that for what you will. Always be careful though. I've had some bizarre experiences with dating apps, but there's one that stands out. It was during my second year of college. At the time, I was still living with my parents. They had gone away for the weekend, leaving me home alone in the empty house. I was alone all day, trying to get some work done, but decided to take a break in the evening. I was watching some TV and feeling lonely, so I began swiping through Tinder, hoping to meet someone. It wasn't long before I matched with a girl named Susan. She wasn't the prettiest girl I had ever seen, but then again, maybe I'm not the hottest myself. I started off by asking her a few questions. She answered quickly, but her responses were really short. I wasn't sure if she was interested at first, but out of nowhere, she suggested coming over to my place. It struck me as forward, especially since we hardly knew each other, but I was lonely and a little desperate, so the thought of meeting someone that night was tempting to me. I sent her my address without much thought. Within about half an hour, a car pulled into my front driveway. I was watching from the front door. She got out of the car and walked up to where I was waiting on the porch. The moment Susan walked through the door, I felt uncomfortable. It was weird enough having a perfect stranger in my house, but she didn't help. Susan was very shy and awkward, not that I can blame her. Maybe she was feeling the same nerves that I was. We made our way into the living room, and I turned on the TV in an attempt to fill the awkward silence. We watched some show for a while, then I tried to spark up a conversation, but it was like talking to a wall. Susan offered little more than single-word responses, and it became painfully clear that there was no spark between us. It was clear to me anyway. As the night dragged on, I wanted her to go. I hinted more than once that it was getting late, hoping she'd take the cue and leave, but she didn't. Eventually, my patience wore thin, and I told her directly that I was heading to bed, and that she needed to leave. It felt rude, but that seemed to get through to her, and I walked her to the front door. I watched her car pull out of the driveway and turn around the corner of my street. By then, it was not even 10 o'clock, and I usually don't go to bed until 1 or 2, so the night was still young. After she was gone, I checked my phone and saw a message from my friend Drew, inviting me over. I knew that he was on a date that night too, so I guess that his didn't go well either. He lived just around the corner, so I thought I would go over there for a bit. After a quick shower and some food, I was ready to go to my friend's place. It was around 10:45 by the time I stepped out. It was a fairly quiet neighborhood, and I was the only one out on the sidewalk. I didn't even see any cars driving by. As I rounded the corner on my street towards Drew's house, there was a car parked on the side of the road facing me. It stuck out to me because it was technically on the wrong side of the street. Its light suddenly turned on, and the engine came to life. Before I knew what was happening, it was hurtling towards me. I leapt out of the way, landing in somebody's front yard. The car screeched to a halt, just in time to avoid running into a fence. There was a lamppost right overhead, and I noticed that it looked like Susan's car. When I looked closer, I could tell that it was Susan. She was glaring at me from behind the wheel. That crazy girl had tried to run me over. That also meant that she was out there waiting for me for about an hour. She must have been pissed that I lied to her and said that I was going to bed. In a second, the car started up again and she drove away, leaving me there on the ground. I ran the rest of the way to Drew's house. When I got there, I told him the whole story. He let me stay over at his place that night because I was way too scared to go home. The next day in the morning, I went back to my house. I was half expecting the whole place to be trashed by Susan, but to my relief, she didn't do anything. I went inside and checked the whole house just to satisfy my paranoia, but there was no sign that she had been back. I then opened Tinder to check my messages and probably block Susan. When I opened the messages, there were a bunch from her. They were a mess of angry, barely coherent rants filled with spelling mistakes and profanities. The content was hard to decipher, but the intent was clear. She was furious. Rejection is tough for anyone to deal with, but we need to control ourselves. Sure, I could have been more honest with her, but she wasn't picking up on my cues. I wanted to end the night, so I told her that I was going to bed. She must have gone out there and waited to make sure I didn't go out. She was out there waiting for me for an hour, but I wonder how much longer she would have sat there. I still wonder if she was actually going to kill me that night. It looked like I was going to be run over, but once I got out of the way the first time, she could have tried again, but she didn't. Maybe she just wanted to scare me, If that's what she wanted, then it definitely worked. I didn't use any dating apps for a while afterwards, and I never saw or heard from Susan again.